So what are we here to talk about today? Well, creative, but specifically how data-driven creative can really turn a campaign around. So let's jump straight into it. So first of all, James, thank you for the great introduction. Just a little bit about myself. I'm Gavin, Global Head at Creative Labs, one of the co-founders of Creative Labs. I've been at Vungle for over 7 years now, so I've really seen how the space has changed, specifically with the intersection between performance, creative, and that beautiful data. So let's get going. Okay, cool. What are we going to talk about today? So first of all, I'm just going to bring you in on a couple of video trends, what we're kind of seeing in the space, maybe something you can take home and will influence maybe the creative you produce or your general UA strategy. Then I want to get into a very interesting topic. This is around playable ad units and how we actually use data to define what kind of playable ads we actually build. And then I'm going to round off with a couple of quick-fire top tips, what we've seen on the Vungle network with specific types of creative and tests, so we can run through that. Cool. So first of all, great question. What actually is Vungle Creative Labs? So Vungle Creative Labs is essentially Vungle's in-house creative agency. We're made up of video editors, creative technologists, strategists, artists, all with a really strong belief that through better performance, through creativity. And what does this actually look like? Well, when we actually look at Vungle's top 100 advertisers, we actually see that Vungle optimized creative makes up for 89% of ad spend, which we like to think is really impressive. But this is actually only possible by really collaborating with a lot of our partners, forging really strong relationships, taking existing creative and really optimizing it for the Vungle network against our data and known best practice. Cool. There we go. So when we talk about data, what are we actually looking at here? So obviously performance data, these are the main metrics we're really looking at. So that's looking at installs, conversion rate, completion rate, click-through rates, but then also retention and LTV. Being able to track the quality of user by creative is super important to us. We're also looking at contextual data. So this is where our creatives are actually being placed. So that's the specific placement, the genre of both publisher and advertiser, language, location. We're also starting to look a little bit around hyper-localization and also around time of day. And I've actually got some really interesting examples to show you on those key pieces a little bit later on. Something else that we're really starting to use to inform the types of creative we build is actually user behavior. So that's duration spent in experience, heat mapping, where people are interacting, really being able to actually test engagement. We actually do this through some specific types of lab testing. We're finding this very interesting. We feel like this is the level of data that's really taking our creative to the next step. Cool. Okay, as promised, I'm going to kick off with some video trends. So what is the question I most get asked about video? How long should it be? Which is a strange question. It's a bit like the question how long is a piece of string? It actually really depends. And to illustrate this, what I've done is I've broken this out by genre. Okay, so what I wanted to look at was specifically for casual and hyper-casual advertisers, where were they really seeing the peaks in installs and also conversion. Hyper-casual, kind of similar, both have casual in the title. But you see some really specific differences here. So with casual, you're seeing a real peak in installs and conversion around the 30 to 34. And also we're actually seeing around 45 seconds is actually also very strong for casual. Why do you think that might be? Casual games have actually changed a lot recently, especially with the rise of the meta game. You know, very often now you'll have a classic style match 3, but it will also have a metagame maybe where you build a house or a garden. I'm sure you're familiar with these titles. With these types of games, you actually need to show a little bit more. So this is probably why we're seeing the longer durations. You're seeing those conversion and install peaks a little bit later on in the video duration, which is pretty interesting. With casual games, these games are super simple, usually very gesture-based controls. Very often, a user will see a simple instructional video and they will understand, hey, this is exactly how the game is played. I'm ready to install. So that's probably why you see more conversion and install peaks at that early stage. Cool. One of the simplest rules is to keep things very simple. We always follow this. When we're approaching a new creative for a new advertiser, we definitely think, you need to keep this simple. Why is this the case? Mobile gaming is blowing up. You're having new users being exposed to mobile games all the time. And your main selling point is your actual game. But it's important to keep it simple and really talk the user through the experience. We find that this really leads to a lot of engagement. Also, speak in the language of the mobile device. Vungle is a mobile ad network, so we're really focused on the mobile device. What does that mean? It means utilizing memes, player versus player, and emoji. And here we've got like an example of a very recent Vungle-produced video where we've really encompassed some of that player versus player and emoji elements into the video. We find this super engaging. You're speaking to the user in the language of the device they're viewing the ad on. Cool. Onto Playables. Okay. So Playables have been a hot topic for probably the past couple of years. Why do we think this is? It's very often because with performance advertising, you're ultimately advertising the game to the user on the device they're able to play it on. So giving them the opportunity to demo the game is super important. You can do this in multiple different ways. Sometimes just replicating the gameplay is enough. Sometimes you can actually take elements from the game and really start experimenting with them, give a really innovative style of experience. We see Playable actually in combination with video is the highest performing creative on the Vungle network right now, and we see on average around like 83% in conversion versus a non-playable creative. But we all know actually making Playables is pretty time consuming and actually can be quite expensive. So it's really important when you're about to start having a playable produced, what data are you looking at to inform what you're going to make? So I want to talk you through a very brief case study of how we actually use some user behavioral data to inform how we started making Playables. Cool. So this was our Pinata playable that we made for Toon Blast. Really like this playable. One of the reasons, it encompasses a couple of known best practices. You obviously have the game board, so you're really showing that simple element of the game. We actually took one of the elements from a game level, which was the pinata, and allowed the users to really interact with it. So once you clear the game board, you could really smash that pinata. But what we wanted to do was actually track where users were interacting on the playable. So we ran this test for around 30 days, collecting around 3 million impressions, and we can share the results. Cool. So we broke this down into the scenes of the game. So first, you obviously have your intro scene. What's important to notice here? You do have a couple of accidental interactions where users are tapping around on the screen. It's very interesting to see that straight away users wanted to engage. They saw something come down on the screen and they went for it. On the second scene, we now have users actually in the game. What's important to notice here, you're seeing those failed exit outs, and actually the CTA has been significantly reduced. Why do we think this is? The user is now playing the playable, they're engaged, they kind of want to continue the experience. So this tells you that once you actually have a user engaging and interacting, give them more to do to keep them in the experience, to really engage them. And ultimately, we have on this third screen where you have that pinata, users really wanted to hit it. Same situation with the exit out. You do notice, got a couple more users trying to exit out after the gameplay scene is finished. That actually maybe shows that some users are just really appealed to by gameplay and they don't really want the pinata element. Really something to consider. And then on the final scene, really interesting to see when the confetti was shooting all around, users were really trying to interact with that confetti. So it really shows just having lots of interaction points is super important. Cool. And this is essentially how we utilize this data to inform the types of playable we built for this client. So we really focused in on feedback on interaction. So if you tapped anywhere on the screen, like even if it's a square that is not able to interact with, give it a little bit of shake. Give actually some audio feedback. This really helps, and obviously definitely focusing on that first interaction and having a really consistent CTA. We saw from the start that some users, after seeing a video and then seeing the playable, they're ready to install. So definitely keep that CTA present. Without further ado, I'm going to run you through a couple of top tips here. Okay, so first of all, great tip for a new section, jump straight in. What do we mean by this? Jump straight into the action. We see that users are engaged traditionally around in the first 1 to 3 seconds. Always lead with your strongest content. Allow users to engage immediately in a playable, or if you're looking at a video, lead with that really, really strong content. I'm sure if you have a game studio, you've got a beautiful logo that you really want to show off, but maybe leave that to the end of the video and really lead with your strong gameplay at the front. Tip 2, show some character. What do we mean by character? There's a lot of really beautiful IP in the mobile space right now, from classic titles such as Angry Birds or the Candy Crush series to existing IP that's found its way over to mobile. For example, here we've got this Looney Tunes example here. And then obviously with RPG style hardcore games, the showcasing of character is very important. And I'm going to talk you through a specific case study on that. So King's Raid is a hardcore RPG style game coming out of Korea. Okay, with titles like this, ROAS, retention are very important. So what we actually wanted to do was test how that was influenced by creative. We really believe that with these games, like the user, maybe they come in for the gameplay, but ultimately it's the characters and the development of the characters that keeps the user actually in the game. So what we really want to do, we made multiple versions of this interactive playable unit where you could test out the various moves of different characters and saw like a 5x increase in day 7 ROAS there. So really important. We believe, as I say, interaction means engagement. And tip 3, be mobile first. What does this mean? The mobile device is very different than TV. It's even different than web style advertising. It's a device where obviously you can play games, you can call your mum, you can maybe arrange your love life. There's a lot you can do with the mobile device, and you need to really tailor your creative for that. But what do we mean by this? One of the things we really like about the mobile device is the ability to use gesture style controls. In addition to this, you can really utilize the gyro. There's a lot you can do with that mobile device. And if you're able to bring that into your creative, we think that's fantastic. This example here for Angry Birds 2 is actually very different to the actual gameplay experience. We really wanted to utilize a 360 space to really allow the users to play around with the theme. And this example up here for Matchington Mansion, we really wanted to use the gesture controls from like the swiping to put out the fire to using a spanner to try and fix the tap there. Really utilizing those gesture-based controls is super important. In addition to this, as I say, like the mobile device it's very different than brand style advertising. Very often we'll have some advertisers, they'll come to us and they'll be like, hey, I've got some fantastic creative, I've got CGI, this is like some legendary IP. This is broadcast quality. We're like, fantastic, great, we'll definitely run it. But what we'd also like to do is actually produce some creative that's a little bit simpler, a little bit tailored for the mobile device, showcasing the gameplay mechanics in a really simple way. And you really see an increase in performance when you do this. So I would always say, definitely utilize your broadcast quality assets, but also focus on those simple mechanics that are really going to engage the user. Cool. Tip 4, context is king. We already talked about when we're approaching contextual data, so time of day, location, placement. We find this is really important. I want to show you some examples. Okay, so first of all, localization is a question we get asked about a lot. Should we be producing creative for specific markets? And we would say it's definitely something to think about. So I've got a bit of a quiz here. So we're doing a bit of an investigation here, trying to find out more about data and creative. So introducing obviously the world's greatest detectives, Sherlock Holmes. So how is he represented in different regions? Obviously in the UK, Benedict Cumberbatch. Classy guy, looking good, fantastic, very British, I'd like to think. In the US, they go for someone like a little bit edgier, maybe with looks like some more hair gel. You've got Robert Downey Jr. in there. But what does Sherlock Holmes look like in Japan? Yeah, quite different. So it's very important to remember that obviously different regions require a different approach. And let me show you some examples. Okay, so with localization, you can actually go beyond localization and actually start thinking about hyperlocal seasonal events. We've been doing a lot of things recently within the China market, looking at specific times of year. So for example, Chinese New Year. What we did here, we took our standard generic end card and edited it so it became the red envelope. If you know anything about Chinese New Year, a red envelope means good stuff is coming your way. So we actually saw the click-through rate go through the roof on this specific creative, very likely because people see the red envelope and they want to interact. These are the kind of things you could do that are very simple but really engaging, looking at hyperlocalization and looking at those seasonal events. This is actually a new creative that only came out last week, so I'm really happy to be able to show it to you. So what we're looking at here is actually time of day. So this is one playable unit that actually changes depending on the time of day. So before 11 o'clock, it introduces you to earn money to essentially maybe get a coffee for your morning, and basically the standard of coffee goes up depending on how well you play the actual game. And then afterwards we were like, well, after maybe if this is for the commute home, it's how you're going to get back. So it's either a dodgy looking taxi, a bus, or a fantastic limo. So this is one creative, and depending on the time of day, it will actually be different. There's so much you can do when you start taking these contextual elements and bringing them into the creative. So, native creative, a lot of people talk about it. It means different things to different people. Having an ad format that looks very similar to the publisher content is one way to do it. But we really believe in the idea of a true native creative. So what do we mean by this? This is basically taking the publisher app and then bringing elements of it into the advertiser creative. So this example, we've got wordscapes. So wordscapes here is the publisher. This is where the ads will be shown. And we basically made two very simple, interactive, playable units to be served within wordscapes. One for Angry Birds and one for Toon Blast. Really taking the elements from the word game and then bringing that into the creative. We find this really exciting, performs very nicely, and at the same time, the publishers love it and the advertisers love it. It's really bringing an element of like synergy there. We find it very powerful. You can then start taking it to the next level. So Grindr has become quite a significant publisher on the Vungle network, and we're always looking to find different ways that we can tailor our creative for a specific advertiser. So we took Empires and Puzzles and we were like, well, why don't we make a Grindr-style end card? So this followed the classic video and basically bringing elements from the Grindr experience into the playable. We were really happy with this, but we were like, I think we can take this to the next level. So as a creative team, we got together. We were lucky to have actually some users of Grindr in our group. So we were really able to come up with a really interesting creative that we ran for Empires and Puzzles. I'm happy to showcase this for you now. So this is essentially taking elements from the Grindr game and going through it. There should be a little bit of sound in here, but I can maybe recreate it. There's a lot of going, and essentially kind of like takes you through a story from the user, that home screen that they know really well, and then bringing some real elements in there. Cool. So just to recap here, so what's important? Follow the data. You can take your data sources from multiple places, whether it's performance or contextual, or some of that user behavior data. Jumping straight into the action. We talked about this with the video units, but also with playable units. Showing some character, very important. If you've got some beautiful IP, some fantastic characters that your users will recognize, really let them sing. And then also being mobile first. Unlock the possibilities of the mobile device with your playables and with your video content. Really consider the device. And then obviously, context is king. Think about the placement, think about location, and how can you tailor your creative to fit.
Hi, you showed this heat map of the playable, and that's pretty cool. And actually, we don't have very good experience with playables with Vungle. And question here: can we test with this? Can we test third-party playables and see like the heat map of them with Vungle?
Absolutely. So this is so we obviously did this with Peak, Toon Blast, one of our larger clients. We really partner with them, so we ran that specific test as a collaboration. You can 100% use third-party playables on the Vungle network. Speak to your Vungle account manager, and they can definitely help you there. When it comes to analytics, we would have to have a conversation about that. We obviously really respect our publishers, so we want to make sure that any data that's being fired, any triggering events from a creative unit, we know where it's going. This is really to respect our publishers. But I'm happy to have a conversation about that after the talk for sure.
Hey, thanks for that. So how do you think about, some of these creative could be heavy or challenging? How do you think about devices from low end to high end and network bandwidth?
Absolutely. It's something we think about a lot. Internally, Vungle Creative Labs, QA is something that we really, really care about. We use device farms. We test on devices from high to low to ensure that we have the best possible experience. At the same time, you can actually put what you would basically call like a back check. So if the creative doesn't render on a specific device, we always ensure that there's two things that a user can interact on. That would be the exit icon and then the CTA. Obviously, if a creative is not rendering properly, the user needs to be able to get out of it. So that's something that we really, really focus on. In terms of how we lower down the package size, there are multiple different steps that we really employ, from being able to stream content to making sure we're utilizing multi-caching within our SDK to make sure those creatives are ready to go as soon as they launch.
Can't see anything. I do have a question actually for you, Gavin. You showed us lots and lots of great creative. How do you measure when a creative has run its course and is maybe fatigued, and when do you refresh or suggest that you come up with another creative?
Absolutely. Question also we get asked a lot around ad fatigue. It's definitely real. At the same time, there is such thing as an evergreen creative. You do sometimes see creative performing for an incredibly long time. But what you need to do is basically give an opportunity for the new creative to essentially get more exploration. So on the Vungle network, we have our creative algorithm that gives a certain amount of impressions to new creative. So always give that opportunity for new creative to take over. Actually recently met with a client and they really wanted to see a visual of what that looks like. So we basically gave them the sands of time of their creative, and you saw one creative comes up, starts to go down, and then another one comes in. So we would actually work with the advertiser to determine how many impressions do they have to work with, how much exploration can we give, and I would say it's always important to bring in new creative, new video, new playables, and also new combinations.
You suggested that 89% of what you're doing is Vungle creative for your clients.
Vungle optimized.
Vungle optimized.
So that will either mean we've made playable units. Majority of the playable units on the Vungle network we produce ourselves. In addition to that, it would be taking in additional video, re-editing. Because we tag everything quite comprehensively, we can track where all of the spend is going. If it's a Vungle video that was produced internally, a third-party playable produced. But that's a lot of data. But maybe we can have a talk about it afterwards.
So leading on from that, just quickly. Are there days where the app developers give you finalized creative over? Are you suggesting that you guys can do it better?
Ooh, once again, I say it's really about a collaboration. Actually, the way the Vungle Creative Labs work, every Monday we sit down together and we look over the network, and we're actually looking for cases where new creatives come on the network and there's an opportunity for us to optimize. Allows us to be very proactive. As I say, we also really utilize having like a very close relationship with a lot of our clients. So we'll know when they've got new creative coming. So very often we have clients who make really beautiful video creative. We're like, hey, we're not touching this. This is fantastic. But there's elements of this that we quite like. How about if we then took it? So from the video, you went into a playable experience that led straight out from it. It's that kind of collaboration that we really look to. And that's why I always say that 89%, that's about optimization and really about like collaboration with our partners.
Thank you very much, Gavin. That was fantastic. Really enjoyed that.